books. Is that how you do it?
Yep.
We just got back from a wonderful holiday visiting some great people, and everything we read last month feels like a long, long time ago. But let's see if we remember.
Welcome back to StoryTube. Let's just get straight into the books. And the first author that I read a couple of authors multiple times in the month of March, in the first half of March. And the first one I read was Ta-Nehisi Coates, or Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm not exactly sure how one pronounces his name. Apologies. But I read two things by this author, two vastly different things, and yet there's some similarities in there. I read the Captain America omnibus, or the contents of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Captain America run for Marvel Comics, which is about 25 issues, 30 issues of Captain America comics. And I also read his work of sort of political, cultural non-fiction, The Message, which came out last year. Both books being heavily political, I got a good sense of Ta-Nehisi Coates' beliefs, how his shifting perspective has evolved over the last couple of years, over the last 5-6 years, about certain issues in the world, certain issues going on in America, and specifically certain issues going on in Palestine right now. First of all, the Captain America run, which I've seen criticisms of this run for being a little too wordy or too heavily political. And for one thing, I will tackle those criticisms by saying that comics have kind of always been political. I'm thinking I might make a video about that. He came under kind of criticism for his Black Panther run, which was a little overly didactic in what he was trying to get across in dialogue, and a little too wordy in that sense. But honestly, I don't think his wordiness is really my criticism. I think sometimes he maybe lets maybe it's a publisher thing, maybe it's an outside criticism thing, but maybe he lets that affect what he's trying to tell. And I noticed it more so in this Captain America run than in the Black Panther run, where he wants to do both a political examination of the character and a weird, bombastic Marvel story with a lot of like comic book fun in it. And sometimes that tonal imbalance is there. It makes for a little bit of inconsistency within the arcs, within his stories. I'm talking about both his Black Panther and Captain America. But I think his underlying political commentary on Captain America is very good and a natural successor to the Ed Brubaker Captain America comics. It's all about Cap struggling with what it means to be Captain America. What does that actually mean? And what is it he represents? And the kind of fundamental hope in that character of representing an ideal that may never exist in America, or may have never existed, but they hope exists. Or it may have existed at one point and they want to bring that back. And it's very good. I really enjoyed Coates' Captain America run. I think it's a little more readable for average comic fans than his Black Panther. His Black Panther was a little more dense, and kind of about the political situation and sort of change from monarchy to democracy in Wakanda. He kind of does all of that in that run. It's a little slower. If you want a little more comic book action, I think the later Black Panther run will tickle your fancy, but also this Cap run kind of juggles both a little better. And also, Cap isn't the leader of a country, so you don't get as much of the top inner workings of politics. But I think this Cap run was really good, and it was, honestly, I'd put it off for a long time. So it was nice to finally get around to it. And then The Message, in a similar way to his Cap run, Coates is working through questions that he has. He doesn't have any definitive answers for questions that he poses in his non-fiction, and in his fiction clearly as well. But he's working through questions. So like some criticisms of his Captain America comics, for example, is a little muddled. Like, what is he actually trying to say? Well, I think he's kind of working through his ideas and working through all of the external input that he gets from media, from news, from stuff that he reads, and his kind of shifting perspective of going to certain places and living the situation there. And that is what the message is about. The message is kind of like a letter to his students, and it deals with 3 separate kind of mini chapters of his life over the last couple of years. One is a trip to South Carolina, to a school that tried to ban his book, Between the World and Me, and kind of fought against it. And specifically meeting a teacher there who fought against that. Another is a trip to Senegal, his first trip to West Africa, to kind of see where his ancestors came from and kind of correlate the black experience in Africa versus the black experience in the United States. And lastly is his trip to Palestine, where all of his notions that are kind of fed to him by American media are challenged by actually visiting the Palestinian people and speaking directly to them and traveling through Palestine and Gaza. And honestly, his writing in this book, I think I described it to a mate as swimming through calm, warm waters. It's very nice to read. It's very pleasant to read. And honestly, I think the message should probably be required reading for a lot of people right now. He brings to light a lot of sentiments, feelings, confusion about the current situation, political landscape in the world, and kind of works through his thought process in a very empathetic way. And I think one could throw criticism of the message is that it's from a distinctly Palestinian perspective and there is no perspective from Israel. But his argument is there has never been a Palestinian perspective, so here it is. And that might rub some people up the wrong way, but honestly it's a perspective that's kind of needed because the Israeli perspective has long been talked about and given voice to. So I think that's a solid argument for the existence of this book. So it's very, very good. And pairing it with some of his Marvel superhero comics was just an interesting little experiment. I'll probably read more from Ta-Nehisi Coates as well. The only thing I'd read previously was his Black Panther comics, which I thought were also very good. But also knowing that his Cap run for Marvel was kind of a direct sequel to Ed Brubaker's run, kind of set me on a bit of a Brubaker kick, and I'll get to that in a moment.
I have been on a bit of a non-fiction kick in the last month, and the first book that I finished in March was The Trading Game by Gary Stevenson. I did this on audio. I actually started it in February and I finished it in March, and that was a recommendation from you because you listened to it last year. So this is a memoir that you would find in probably the finance or economics section of your local bookshop, which is not a section that I usually browse.
Nor do I.
So what's different about this book? Why was it interesting to me other than because you recommended it? So Gary Stevenson is a British economist and now wealth inequality activist. He went to the London School of Economics and then he started working as a trader for Citibank. But he has an unusual background. He comes from a very working class family and got partially lucky to get to where he did. And for a while was the most profitable trader at Citibank.
Or so he claims.
Or so he claims. I don't know. But he goes through his kind of rags to riches story of how he got to where he did. And then he also goes into how he made that money and why he was able to make that money. And it all kind of comes back to wealth inequality. So this is about the economy, but it is taking a slightly different perspective on the economy and why it is the way it is now, and also going a little bit into why maybe nobody has explored this before. Through that, we follow his journey of becoming disillusioned with being a trader, even though it made him a multimillionaire, and eventually how he got out of that and how he transitioned into being a wealth inequality activist and why he does what he does. It's a really, really interesting book. He's a very interesting guy. He also has a YouTube channel called Gary's Economics. If you want to check that out, I would highly, highly recommend it. It's very interesting content. I am not someone who has ever been super interested in the economy as an abstract concept, but it does affect our daily lives, and maybe now more than ever. So it's a very good book. The audio is great as well. He narrates it himself, and I just enjoy listening to memoirs in that way. Highly recommend.
The first half of the trading game might feel like a Wolf of Wall Street type rags to riches. Yeah, I'm just on my grind, on my hustle type of bullshit. But he's very intentional about that. And then he kind of pulls the rug from under you, exposing the darker side of living that kind of life and what it kind of did to his soul. The whole book is essentially like a prologue to just where he is right now and why he's doing what he's doing on his YouTube channel and like sort of on a grander political scale.
Yeah, and he brought a unique perspective to it because of his background and because of dealing on a daily basis with his friends and his family during the financial crash of 2007, 2008 and the years that follows, while also profiting immensely on a personal level from it. So it's very interesting, and it's an important book for our times, I believe.
So I mentioned Ed Brubaker while talking about Ta-Nehisi Coates' Captain America, and you will see that I made a video all about Ed Brubaker on the channel, kind of my first video essay of sorts, at least the first 10-15 minutes of it.
Go watch it.
Yeah, go watch that video. It's all about, there's a little bit of history of comics in there, and the kinds of comics that Ed Brubaker writes. But in preparing for that video, I had to plug some gaps in my Brubaker Phillips repertoire. So I read Fatale, which was the biggest series from them that I had not read yet. And this is Lovecraftian horror noir set in the 50s, kind of spans a few decades up to the 90s. And it is a clever play on the femme fatale trope. Main character of Josephine is a woman who doesn't age and seems to have a certain hypnotic power over men. Men become obsessed with her. They feel they can protect her, save her, and just generally go pretty apeshit when she's around. And it's very, very, very good. These comics are not for children. Please don't give them to your kids. But that was the first one that I had to plug the gap for kind of preparing for that video. I won't go too in depth on it. You can go watch the video. I break down everything that Brubaker and Phillips wrote and drew together as a duo, and also a bit of Brubaker centric stuff as well, like his Captain America run. But the other two that I read that I really want to highlight are two graphic novels. So they're graphic novels because these were published as one whole story. They're about 200 pages each, as opposed to Fatale, which was serialized comic book, so a certain number of pages published per month or on a whatever schedule they were working on. And the first one that I read was Night Fever, which is unbelievable. Actually, both of these graphic novels that I read are unbelievable. The other one was Where the Body Was. Night Fever is a fever dream of a story about a publishing agent that goes on to a conference in France and is kind of in a midlife crisis, a little bored with life, and then falls into this kind of pit of depravity and violence and exploring his darker side. And it's a little bit like Eyes Wide Shut and Breaking Bad, maybe, if you want to give a weird, stupid Hollywood comparison. And Where the Body Was is kind of like a puzzle box mystery book. It's set on one street in suburban America, a fictional street in suburban America, and all the characters are witness to something that happens. We're not sure exactly what, because all of the characters have their own story to tell, and they kind of narrate it to you, the reader, a bit of fourth wall breaking. And this is all about what is the truth. But it's all about the characters. It's all about their lives, their decisions, very Brubaker Phillips. Brubaker tends to write all of the plot, script, story, and Sean Phillips will do all of his artwork. It's kind of classic Brubaker in the sense that all of these characters have their problems. They're all a bit messed up. They're all lost. And they're all nostalgic about something. Or they're all living with the consequences of past mistakes and current mistakes. This is just a great book about people. And it's very short. Both of these graphic novels very quick and easy to read. You'll read them in a day. So I highly recommend it. I won't go into too much depth here because go watch the video that I made. It's called How This Duo Revitalized Crime Noir and Comics. And how all of these comics are kind of harking back to the old days of pre-code comics and sort of adult-themed comics. And outside the superhero realm. So go watch that video if you're interested in these books.
Second book I read in March, I read in an afternoon because it's very, very short, and that is What Does Israel Fear from Palestine by Raja Shehadeh, which I have probably mispronounced, and if you know how to pronounce it, let me know. This is an essay, it's 108 pages, and it's divided into two parts. The second part is specifically about Gaza and the West Bank in the last 2 years, in 2023 and 2024. And the first part is how did we get here? And I found this to be a very good high-level introduction from a perspective that you might not find in your everyday media.
In Western media?
Yes. You don't need to have a ton of previous knowledge to it. It's also not going extremely deep into like the historical context or anything like that. There are other books for that are a bit more dense. This really is more of an essay, and you're following the author from his perspective and his family, and just getting a little bit of background on the war in Gaza. There are a lot of books that I want to read about this situation in general that we have, and this felt like a good introduction to it because it's accessible and because it's short and because it helps you familiarize yourself with like the history in very broad strokes.
Next thing I read was unfortunately not a very good book, but I'm continuing my read-through of the Star Wars Expanded Universe novels and finished off the Jedi Academy trilogy. Really enjoyed book 2, strangely enough, because I wasn't a fan of the first book and not really a fan of the third book. But there's some good stuff in here and some important kind of plot beat, character beats in here for me to continue on. But honestly, I think this trilogy is probably largely skippable in the grand scheme of things. But I've set out a little reading order for myself, so I didn't want to skip. And I read Champions of the Force, which is the third one. Kevin J. Anderson is not a good writer. There's some fun plot beats, I think, throughout the 3 books. Jedi Search, Dark Apprentice, and this one, Champions of the Force. But there's just some laughably quick shifts to the dark side, you know, that kind of nonsense. And no real kind of sort of depth to the Jedi way versus Sith way idea, which is a very cool idea in Star Wars lore. And I'm sure there are writers in the novels that have kind of explored that better. But yeah, honestly, Kevin J. Anderson, I'm happy to be moving on. I think next I'll read I, Jedi. I've heard maybe mixed things about that book as well, but after that I have another Thrawn book, or a duology actually, from Timothy Zahn, so I'm looking forward to that because I really like the Thrawn books. So that's Star Wars.
All worth it to get to Thrawn.
Yeah.
Do not despair, I did read some fiction this month, but first let me tell you about the last non-fiction book that I read, and that is One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El-Akkad, or to give you the full title, One Day, when it's safe, when there's no personal downside to calling a thing what it is, when it's too late to hold anyone accountable, everyone will have always been against this. This book is also short. It's 180 pages. Once again, sort of memoir / political. Omar El-Akkad is a journalist and a writer. He was born in Egypt, moved to Canada, is now in the United States. And this book is him wrestling with what it's like to be an Arab man in the Western world, interacting with the politics of the Western world, and specifically with liberal politics after October 2023. It is a devastating, beautifully written, haunting book. every other line felt like a punch in the face. It really made me want to pick up his fiction. I'd never read anything by him before, but he is an extraordinary writer. I loved his prose in this. It made me emotional a few times. And even though it didn't tell me anything that I wouldn't have thought about before or that I didn't necessarily know before, it just illustrated it in a way that was so well put that it confronted me with certain aspects of it that feel uncomfortable to explore. And once again, this kind of seems like a theme this month. I just think this is a really, really important book. I urge you to go read it.
We spent the last 2 weeks in March visiting some friends in the US, most notably Jimmy Nuts, his lovely wife Kelsey, and our friend Amanda from Shelf Unstable, but also author Anya Dillon. While on the plane to the US, I wanted to read Anya Dillon's book, Severed Echoes, which is my first ever self-published book that I've read.
Woo!
And this was fucking great. I'm not just saying that because Anya Dillon is a friend of ours. I started this book at 11 a.m. Irish time when we got on the plane, and I finished it at whatever time it was when we landed.
6 hours later.
6 hours later. Probably about 15 minutes before the plane landed, I finished this book. That is my review. I read this book in 5.5 hours, 6 hours. Could not put it down. I never knew what was going to happen. This book is a dark thriller, fantasy, romance, science fiction, something.
What genre do you want? Yes.
Yeah. This is a very unique book, and I don't really want to give anything away because you will never be able to predict where it's going to go because it's fucking bananas. And that's honestly the best. It's the best thing. I don't want a book to be predictable. And this book is anything but, even though it uses a lot of possibly, potentially predictable tropes. But it just goes in completely different directions to what you would expect. The ending is really cool. Very intrigued if Anya/Amanda is ever going to write any more. So yeah, I would strongly urge people to read Severed Echoes. Hopefully we'll make a review, joint review, because you've read it as well.
Yep.
And we'll get that out there. Yeah, I would say it starts off kind of thriller, and certainly like sort of kidnap thriller. It got that kind of vibe at the very beginning. You know, out in the woods in the middle of nowhere, a car following another car, somebody in the trunk. But where it goes will honestly, yeah, again, unpredictable. That's all I can really say without spoiling it. Please pick up a copy. You can buy it on Amazon. I'm pretty sure you can get it on Kindle and ebook and all that kind of thing. And yes, we're in full-on sales mode right now for our friend, but suck it up. The book is good.
It's a really good book.
It's very good. Please read it. It's very good. And also, just before the trip, I wanted to finish off something else as well, and that was the first Travis McGee novel, which was a recommendation from Mr. Travis McGee himself, Joseph from Joseph Reads Books, who has been reading nothing but these books for the last few months, and also Bridger from the Library Ladder. And I read book 1, The Deep Blue Goodbye, I think is the title, which introduces the character of Travis McGee, and I can see the influence that it has on one of my favourite characters in fiction and thrillers, which is Jack Reacher. There is a bit of Jack Reacher in him, but Travis McGee is a problem solver for hire, but what he does is essentially track down items that are important to people, or track down things that are important to people, but that aren't necessarily always legal. And he lives on a boat down in Florida, and he's kind of just he's a charismatic, confident, tough guy. And my God, can John D. MacDonald write a sentence? This has got some prose that is sharper than my fucking tongue. There's an element of, of its timeness to it with how certain women are written, but it's not overbearing and it's not something that will make you really roll your eyes, but it's there, it's present. This was written in the 60s, it's kind of pulpy. But honestly, my mood with reading Brubaker and kind of researching old pulps and pulp comics, I was in the mood to read something like this. And it was about time that I read Travis McGee, which our friend Joseph has been going on about it to us for quite some time. He also sent us a wonderful little first edition, which I don't have in front of me right now, but I'll put a picture of it right here. So that was also very good, and I kind of wanted to get that done before we went on our cool little trip to the United States of America. So that's it. That's what I read in March before our trip.
The last book that I read, I finished on the 20th of March. It took me 3 weeks to read, and I haven't really read anything since. First because we were having a very good time, and now because I am sad, and I miss you guys. So I read Deadhouse Gates by Stephen Erickson.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. You might remember, if you were around watching our channel at the time, that last year I read Gardens of the Moon and I was a bit mixed on it. It was a combination of not the right time, burnout of fantasy, and just the book feeling a bit stoppy-starty to me. So I was concerned, because you have been loving Malazan so much, that it wouldn't be a series for me and that we were going to have problems when gushing about books, which is just sad. But fear not, this was a banger. I loved this. I'm not without criticism. I did get a little bit tired somewhere around the 70-80% mark, but it got me back, and just the vibes are immaculate. I really sank into this book, which is something that I couldn't with Gardens of the Moon. This really worked for me. All the characters were interesting to different degrees. I liked some more than others, but everything was interesting, and I felt like I always had enough of a grasp of what was happening to be immersed and enjoy what I was reading, even if at no point could I tell you exactly why things were happening the way they were happening. But I've been told that that is a theme with the books. And where in Gardens of the Moon I could never quite grasp enough to care, I did not have that problem with Deadhouse Gates. I don't want to say too much about it because I think we'll probably make some videos chatting about these books now that we're both reading them, which is really fun, and I'm excited to do that. So I'll leave it at this and just let you know that I'm pretty much all in for this series. I will take my time because I do think that it's better slow and I don't want to burn myself out. But we need more deserts in fantasy. That is everything that we read in March. Do you have a book of the month?
It's difficult because I'm torn between The Message, the two Brubaker graphic novels, Where the Body Was and Night Fever, and Severed Echoes. So just because Amanda's our friend, I'm going to give it to Severed Echoes.
My book of the month is One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. Incredible book.
Nice.
But everything I read was good.
What did you read in the month of March? Let us know down in the comments. Give the video a like if you liked it. We're happy to be back. Are we?
I don't know.
Our trip was great. We might put a picture or two at the end if you want to look at those.
We got to hang out with some of our favorite people.
Yeah, let us know what you read in the month of March. Let us know what you think of the books that we read in March. If you've read them too, if you haven't read them, are you interested in them? Give the video a like. Subscribe if this is the first time you're watching us. What a strange video to find us with. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching.